The Heart of Britannia, a narrative essay by Michael Lieber. Read by James Brown. I write this passage candidly, 1,300 feet above the earth, for I am travelling in style today, although where I do not know, by a hot air balloon. It is a splendid summer day in England, green and glorious. The air is sweet, the rolling countryside vast in every direction, the growing River Thames meandering its way to a distant blip. Hello, London, you handsome hive. Oddly, I do not feel anxious. I've never been a big fan of heights, but there is something about the sheer distance of being this high up that makes it seem like an illusion. It doesn't look real to the eye, but more importantly, I feel inspired to write. Nothing specific comes to mind, but the spark is there. Something will come to me soon. I can feel I am on the cusp of something, as if all my work had been leading up to this moment. But to what? What is it? Of late I have felt so very lost, with my head in the clouds, off with the fairies. But perhaps I should start with the series of events that led to me being in this precarious basket. Writing away in a pocket notebook next to a strange little man that I barely know, who insists I call him Captain. It all began in a tiny, dark pub in dear old Lichfield, of all places. The Earl of Lichfield. I always find myself drawn in there for a quick drink whenever I am in Lichfield, for it has an old-fashioned charm that I appreciate, a dimly lit, cosy quality seldom found in modern pubs. When I am there, I tend to acquire my pint and then sit alone in a quiet corner. Some know who I am and point from a distance. Some don't. Some are acquainted with me and will come over and talk. On this occasion, the charismatic acquaintance that claimed the chair opposite me was by far one of my favourites. He was a short, balding man, I'd say in his mid-60s, newly retired. He spoke very quickly and was obsessed with all things aviation. He knew all the names of the Red Arrows, past and present, off by heart, could drone about Spitfires and Messerschmitts for hours and hours, attended aerospace conventions and air festivals, and had acquired, in his retirement, his very own hot air balloon, and obtained a license to fly it. This, as he saw it, gave him divine right to proudly work into every conversation that he was a certified aeronaut. I never found out what his actual job was prior to retirement, but, at a guess, I would say a rather mundane but well-paying office job that had not the slightest thing to do with aviation. I've never had much interest in this particular subject, but when he spoke of his passion, his joy of flight was infectious. He had a lick of the poet about him. I would say I met this man a total of 11 times over a span of 5 years, and this is long enough in pub years for greetings to become crystallized. He would approach with his whiskey, sit down and say something like, "Hello, Mike," or Mick, or Mickey, or some other malformed version of my name, and then say, "How's the book business?" I in turn would say, "It's going very well. How's the balloon?" His response to this was always, "Living the dream. I'll take you up with me sometime." Now, this was an offer neither of us really took seriously. It was a pleasantry, and one I would never usually consider. As previously stated, one is prone to vertigo. But on this occasion, I was in a particular state of mind. I felt restless, and had just told a lie. The writing was not going very well. I hadn't written anything in almost a year, and any and all inspiration eluded me. I needed a kick, a jolt, something to fear, something to worry about, to overcome. So as our conversation ran its course, or rather I listened to him talk and talk about Pinewood biplanes of World War I and a few low-voiced trivia facts about Adolf Hitler, I waited patiently for the balloon to come up again, as it were. I didn't have to wait long. "Speaking as a qualified aeronaut," he said, taking a gulp of his whiskey, "they should bring back the airship industry for transporting freights. Twice as cost-effective as cargo ships, and you can land anywhere. That's why I went for a balloon instead of a plane. The accessibility." This was my moment. "Speaking of your balloon," I explained my dry well of inspiration, and that such an excursion would invigorate my pen hand. I then inquired when he was planning his next flight. He went oddly quiet and took another very slow sip from his whiskey. There was a feeling in the air that I had overstepped a boundary, that I had shattered the shallow pleasure of engaging with a casual acquaintance by asking for something more, something real, something tangible, something that required commitment. I could practically see the leaping of his brain as he ran through all of our encounters to ascertain how well he knew me. Not quite well enough. He leant forward, pensively, and took to discouraging. Well, the balloon isn't here in Lichfield, it's in Rickmansworth, miles away, where my son lives. He's got a truck. You need a truck for loading and pickup. Oh, how I think back on this moment. I should have just given a casual wave of my hand. Oh, never mind then. I'll get the next round. Same again, bells and tonic. But I persisted, didn't I? Stupid, Michael. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Every chance he gave me to relinquish, I battled back in a wave of optimism. Well, I can get to Rickmansworth, no problem. When are you next going down? Well, next weekend, but you'll have to put a good £500 towards the cost of the flight. It's not cheap, There is petrol for the truck, fuel for the burner. Not a problem. Saturday or Sunday? Well, I suppose Saturday. But I wear a special hat when I fly. You'll have to call me Captain. I saluted. Aye, aye, Captain. I am aware I'm not coming across very well here, but the worst of me is yet to come. He did eventually settle upon my proposed adventure, and even got quite excited about it after half an hour or so, and spoke of the views I would see, and he would teach me about warm and cold weather conditions. But even as we parted ways at the end of the night, with our dates set and phone numbers exchanged, it still took a good few attempts to convince him that I was being deadly serious. Now, you will notice that I have not yet mentioned his name, and nor do I intend to. The reason why will become evident by the end of this essay, but for the sake of addressing him, he will henceforth be referred to as the Captain. It has also just occurred to me that I best not mention what year all this occurred in. Again, all will become evident. I should like to shorten, or rather squeeze, the details of the commute, for efficiency if nothing else. On the day, got a handful of trains to Rickmansworth, 2 missed calls from the captain, 1 phone call with the captain, directions included, and 1 taxi ride to a field. And my timing could not have been more perfect, for the awkward handsy job of filling the balloon with hot air as it blubbers on its side had already been completed, and its gigantic size was magnificent. Oh, how I wish I could describe it to you, what it looked like, its colours, its shape and accessories, but its identifying features must remain a secret. Again, all will become evident by the end of this story. But I suppose, as I can't describe to you what the balloon actually looked like, there is no harm in making a description up. Its humongous bulb was gold and royal blue, with Grecian patterns and spirals, and crowned around its middle, with draping plumes of red satin. I know it may be lackluster to hear a fictionalized account of the balloon, but I assure you, the description I have just given doesn't even come close to how glorious this balloon actually was. It must have cost him a small fortune to have it custom made. The captain was already in the basket, fiddling with the burner, and to my amusement, he wasn't joking. He did actually have a type of captain's hat, like a mariner's cap, or like an old-timey train driver's cap, like the type Buster Keaton wore in that old movie, The General. I met the son, complete with truck, a very large, well-rounded, jolly type of soul. His arms were covered in tattoos. He seemed to know an awful lot about me. The father had built me up in his head, I think. Such imagined pedestals are not to be reached by anyone. As soon as I got into the basket, it was immediately clear that the captain's flying temperament was not the same as the whiskey-gulping man I knew from the Earl of Lichfield. He was sharp, technical, and professional. Good. I'm glad of it. It makes me feel safer. We're going up 2,000, possibly 2,500 feet. We'll be in the air for approximately 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll come down in another field to the north, on the outskirts of London. The son's job was essentially to drive after the balloon and pick us up wherever we landed. There seemed to be multiple gadgets and trackers and walkie-talkies on the go to help with this endeavour. I took a deep breath The son got into his truck, the burner was turned up, and we were off. For the first few minutes, I had my eyes firmly closed and my nervous fingernails firmly embedded in one of the foam-sheathed crossbeams that holds the basket to the burner as the grassy field was pushed away from us, revealing itself to be just one green square among many. The son's voice staticked through the captain's walkie-talkie. "Pulling out the field now." I opened my eyes. The illusion was complete. And we are now, more or less, back to where the story started. But the setting is worth mentioning more than once. It was a splendid summer day. The River Thames revealed its full serpenthood before us, and I had not forgotten my reason for being there in the first place: to be inspired. 45 minutes to an hour is not really enough time to write anything substantial, leaving only short form to be achieved. And even this proved difficult, as the captain took it upon himself to act the good host and talked for a good while. Some of his facts about the history of ballooning seemed quite interesting and somewhat inspiring. But when he began to complain about new balloon flight restrictions and overly safe legislations put in place by the BBAC, British Balloon and Airship Club, this, I must confess, titillated about as much inspiration as a wet teaspoon. But naturally, as a diligent Englishman, I nod and aha and oh really. Meanwhile, I'm scribbling anything I can in my notebook as fiercely as the wind is ruffling my beard. A thought, a quotation, anything, just so I've at least written something. A man who wants to be strong will always have the last word, but a man who is strong will... I can't think of an ending. I was distracted, but still enjoying myself all the same. The captain continued to talk for a further 10 minutes, making 15 in total. But then, to my immense relief, he suddenly went deadly quiet. And it was such a sudden halt of speech that I took cause to look at him. He was frowning intently at one of his gizmos. "Anything wrong with the balloon?" I said. No, it's all fine," he replied sharply. I took this to mean all was above board and went back to admiring the view and the beauty of London off in the distance, which curiously seemed a lot closer than a moment ago, although the plan was to skirt the outer edges of London, so I didn't pay it much mind. I returned to my now quiet musings. So many little thoughts. Perhaps I shouldn't pander to the academics anymore. At least, not so much. Perhaps I should write a children's book, the type that can be told again and again and again, and achieve real significance to a long line of generations. It is not the first time I have had such a notion. It usually lasts about 3 weeks to a month and then turns on me, revealing itself to be a terrible idea. But I look at Dickens, I look at Twain, I look at Carroll, Barrie, and Anderson. It puts me in a sort of kind-eyed, Disneyland, Alice and Pan type of mood. And in that short time, before the turn, it seems perfectly possible to me. But of course the biggest concern one has with a fairy tale is not that it will fall into obscurity, but rather that it will reach such popularity that it will leave you behind. Why, only the other day I was in a service station on the way to Tenby, South Wales, to visit my mother. There was a table display with children's books for sale, among them a simplified edition of Treasure Island. I picked it up and flicked all the way through it, and not once, not even in small print, could I find the name of its original creator, Robert Louis Stevenson. The story was out of copyright, re-illustrated, rewritten, and repackaged for the masses. The story had surpassed its author. But I suppose the story still having enough relevance to be retold is at least something. My concentration was interrupted again, this time by the son's voice breaking up terribly as it crackled out of the walkie-talkie and said something like, "What's it saying?" I turned to look at the captain again, who now had an expression of both worry and anger. 12 knots, 14 miles per hour, said the captain. "Is that bad?" said I. "You'll have to go higher," said the son. "I am," said the captain. "Just tell me what's going on," said I. The captain took a deep, irritated breath. "We're having some unexpected wind shear. It's pushing us further east than we want to go, and so we need to go higher." It was then that I realized where we actually were. We were no longer sailing over green fields on the outskirts of London. We were now technically in London. and all abundant nature had been replaced with a sea of rooftops and busy roads. The balloon was going slowly higher, but not as steadily as we were moving west, and with every borough we passed, the captain became ever more troubled. The sun had now gone silent. He was either completely out of range or was concentrating on tracking our whereabouts, because after 10 minutes of undisturbed drifting, our fate became crystal clear. Not only had our direction completely changed, but we were going to be swept right over the centre of London. As someone who doesn't know the first thing about flying a balloon, the question I wanted quickly answered was, are we in danger? Is this bad for the balloon? Is this unsafe? Put simply, are we going to die, Captain? But as he had to tell me numerous times, this was not the problem. Just to add perspective to our growing predicament, hot air ballooning over central London, at this time, had been strictly prohibited because of concerns of terrorism. Our situation was not only potentially dangerous, but it was also punishable by a hefty fine. As the worried captain turned on his phone and set about Googling with limited signal exactly how much the hefty fine would be, I took the opportunity to appreciate where we were. The view was indeed a rare one. Just as an aside, the use of a mobile phone in a hot air balloon, as I would find out years later, was also strictly forbidden. The whole escapade was becoming very messy indeed. But my, was it a sight! We had finally arrived. Hello, Big Ben. Hello, Tower Bridge. Hello, London Eye. And in that moment, something irresistible came over me, a feeling of supreme imperiousness. I stretched out wide my Icarus arms as my beard and blue scarf ruffled about me, the words of Ozymandias echoing in my ears. I'm ashamed to admit it, but it's true. I couldn't help myself. It was truly intoxicating. But perhaps I should explain. You see, the last and final time I lived in London from the time of this event was a few years prior. I had left in terrible circumstances. My love for the London stage had dwindled awfully low. I was disillusioned, penniless, and heartbroken, practically running back to the Midlands with my tail between my legs. And I suppose, all things considered, descending upon the entire city in a gigantic, garish hot air balloon with arms of Christ could possibly qualify as a magnificent return. At the very least, it was one hell of an entrance. But just as I was enjoying the warm glow of 1,000,000 sets of eyes looking up at me as we floated over the Thames, the captain's quiet spell finally broke. As he proceeded to swear repeatedly and gasp at his phone, I presumed he had now discovered how much the fine would be for any balloon pilot caught flying over central London. What does it say? I asked, taken aback by his sudden rage. That's ridiculous. I'm not paying that. I can't pay that, he said, more to himself than to me. And, in his agitated state, he put the burner on full blast and turned our slow, safe ascent upwards into a fast, hair-raising climb to the clouds. In that moment I became aggressive towards him. I was scared. I had no idea what was happening. But looking back in retrospect, I presume the captain's logic was either to evade being spotted, reported, and subsequently fined by hiding in cloud cover, or to reach such a height that it wouldn't technically qualify as being over a city. I never found out how much the fine was, but I imagine it must have been an obscene amount to make the captain suddenly drop all aspects of safety and professionalism. I must have said many things in that moment that made him even more distressed. The higher we went, the more we turned on each other, until the captain and I proceeded to engage in what can only be described as a full-blown screaming match, as the temperature changed from mild to noticeably freezing. The conversation went much like this. I have, of course, removed all of the profanity and replaced the incoherent crossovers with an adequate translation. I say, Captain, land this balloon sharpish. You are going to put us in a sticky situation. Don't tell me how to conduct myself. This is your fault, Mr. Lieber. You asked to come. That is indeed true, but I do not control the wind, my good captain. And on this went, and only when I, hand on heart, promised to sign a legal document that I would take full responsibility for any financial fine that befell him did he begin to calm down. I better address this as an aside also. I did not sign any such document. Not that it would have stood up in any court of law, even if I had. But he was at least calm. Angry, irritated, but calm. We were now more or less clear of the city. The boroughs and small towns of outer London were now below us again. We didn't speak or even look at each other as we drifted downwards. I think he may have told me begrudgingly to hold on tight to one of the padded beams as we touched down in a field. It was quite a smooth and steady landing, I remember. It was about the only thing that was smooth on the entire venture. Now, my first impulse, as we both left the basket, was to physically attack the captain in some fashion for putting me in so much danger, but as we exchanged a passing glance, it was clear that he was struggling with the same impulse for potentially costing him a great sum of money. In the end, we settled upon a sort of tired cross relief. The son was called, who sounded even more relieved than we were. He was half an hour away. That was a very long and awkward 30 minutes of waiting. But eventually that lovely vehicle came into view. The balloon was deflated, bundled up like a sleeping bag, loaded with the basket onto the truck, and we set off. The son tried to lighten the mood, but eventually he went as quiet as we were. They dropped me off at the nearest station and drove away, and I never saw the captain or his son ever again. I would have expected to have bumped into him by now, with the amount of times I've been back to Lichfield and frequented that same pub. But I never have, and because I have had no contact with the captain, I never found out if anything came of the fine. But if it did come to nothing, I presume that amazing balloon, not so much the basket and burner, but the envelope, the balloon itself, was never flown again, for fear of incriminating the poor captain. And if it does still exist, it is most likely rotting in a garage somewhere. If this is so, it is a true waste of beauty, and only those who looked up on that lost London day will know how truly remarkable it really was. It's sad the captain didn't name it. All beautiful things should have a name, and for the few precious times it graced the sky, I shall name it now, and may it be remembered for that day. The Heart of Britannia.